Okay, well, I should just send around attendance. As always, thank you again to folks who are coming. I ran out of paper last class. It must be getting towards the end of the semester, right? I no longer have paper for my attendance sheets. Okay, so there's a news item. Our wonderful instructor, Andrea Medina, has invited two broadcast journalists from KRON, which is Channel 4, and they will be coming to ArtX 164 at 1 o'clock today. So, and our writing class is we're going to go over there for that. But if you're interested in hearing a couple of people from KRON talk about what it's, their experience of working in broadcast journalism, highly recommended. So that the ArtX building is where my office is, across the street, sort of on that side of campus. Check that out. Okay. Otherwise, on Thursday in this class, we are having our industry news presentation. It is mandatory to attend and also to present. So some people have already done what I asked, and I also sent an email about it yesterday. Hopefully, or made an announcement. I think that automatically sends an email. So let's talk about that in a second. Okay, just texting this out there to folks who are in chat as well. So what's going to happen? This is on Thursday, right? And it's everybody should be here. I'm asking you to prepare a 1-minute presentation of an important news item about something that's going on in the electronic media industries. Canvas has sorted folks into groups. People are not playing ball. People are not doing what I asked, which is to go into the discussion and basically find out what group you were in. So if you entered the discussion, you won't see all of these options. You'll just automatically find yourself, for instance, in Team 2. And it says, use this discussion to prepare for your industry news presentation on 11/15. That's on Thursday. So really, now is the time to prepare. You will see a prompt with your assigned topic as the first post in the discussion. So look down here, and there is the first post in the discussion. Okay? Post a link to the news story that you will be summarizing in your 1-minute long presentation. So what you got to do is look in this post and see, okay, what am I working on? Well, if you're in this group, you are working on streaming music. Okay, so like Spotify, Apple Music, Pandora, SoundCloud, Google Play, Amazon Music. Look for a news item about any one of those. So let's look. I don't want to steal anybody's thunder, but let's search Pandora. Okay, that was on the list. So I don't need to go to their website. I won't learn too much about that. But let us look under news. So here we go. So looking under news, headlines, Pandora brings its genome technology to podcast recommendations. That's pretty awesome. 3 hours ago. Pandora will personalize podcasts. Pandora seems to be into podcasts, don't they? Okay. Pandora names Jason Roth head of product and partnership. So that's probably a little less interesting. We've got a new executive there. But this Pandora's podcast genome project looks really interesting. Ooh, check this out. The SiriusXM Pandora merger. So those are also big news items. When, for instance, satellite radio company SiriusXM will now merge with Pandora. So if anybody finds that they are working on the streaming music angle, those are two excellent news items that you could look at. Either this one or this one. Both of them are really interesting. One is a big business merger. The other one seems to be an interesting opportunity to talk about Pandora's technology. So that's just basically done by finding out what you're supposed to be writing about and then searching it. And you may not have the confidence that I have in determining what is an interesting news item to pick. So let me point it out. It says here, the article that you choose to summarize should be recent, not more than 2 years old. So I checked the dates there. They were both from November of this year. That's fantastic. Newsworthy, about a major event such as the company being sold or buying another company, entering a new business like streaming, or launching a new product or series. Okay? So I thought the first story looked really interesting because it is using its product, which is basically the genome recommendation technology, in a new business of podcasting. That's cool. And then the second news item I picked was the company being sold to another company. So that's Pandora merging with SiriusXM. So that's why I thought those were newsworthy. Reliable, from a newspaper, trade magazine, or other respected news source. So, you know, look at your links with discretion. Try maybe to make sure that the news item doesn't just appear in some obscure little thing, but actually is reported in Variety or in Wired, or in a newspaper or something like that. It doesn't have to be, but it helps. If big news happens, big news is usually reported in a few places. If you find only one really obscure link, it might not be true. So use that. Unique, make sure nobody else in your group is doing this story. So that's why I have asked everybody to, again, go through this, basically the instructions for the industry news assignment, click on the discussion link and find out what part of the industry you are to report on, okay? Then you reply down here and you post a link to a story. Let me just do that for you, okay? Pandora, I like the merger. Let me do that. Boom. I'm going to copy that link. I'm going to go down here and I'm going to say, will work on Sirius XM Pandora merger. Boom. Paste. Let them know. If you want to make it linkable, ooh, that's even more fun, right? That's how to insert a link. Okay. And so there you go. Now, anybody else who happens to be working in there will be sure that they're not going to summarize that article so that you don't come in on Thursday and basically talk about the same thing incessantly, which would be a shame. However, at this point, I'm really hoping that anybody does any preparation for this. So there it is. Any questions about this? Gloria, you just came in. You missed part of this maybe, but are you up with what we're doing?
I have a basic idea, but...
Oh, okay. Well, let me just clarify, because it's so let's go into the modules. So on Thursday, we are doing the industry news assignment, the in-class presentation, industry news on Thursday. And maybe this should actually be pushed up into this one, right? Let's put it here. So in order to do this, on Thursday, everyone's supposed to be here. I'm asking everybody to summarize a news article about a media business in 1 minute. Stand up here and go, the New York Times reports that Sony is buying AT&T, and this is my thing, right, in a minute. And basically just summarize the news article. And this little thing that we're doing prior to that, the instructions here, is I'm just trying to get people aware of what everybody else is doing. So if, Laura, if you go to your Canvas, you click on this, you'll find that you've already been sorted into a team. And this won't appear here. You'll just look down and you will find this thing ever loads. Shall we load here? You will find stuff under here anyway, which says what other people are doing. And if you don't see anything there, go right ahead, pick whichever one you want. Okay. So that should. Yeah. So look for the one that's all kind of in orange, and you'll find out. Summarizing the important event in the streaming audio industry. Okay. So that's to do as soon as you can, but definitely before Thursday because you're going to need to just do your presentation. Please script it out so that it takes only a minute. There's nothing worse than having people stand up and go, whoa, I read this. And it's like 5 minutes later we learned what we should have learned in a minute. So just write it out as efficiently as you can.
I'm having trouble rewording it.
You don't need to reword it. You just reduce it to a minute.
I know, but it's just, I need to use my own words because I basically use the words on the website. And I think I should go.
Yeah, I don't care as long as it lasts a minute. Yeah, that's the main thing. So if you know, there's probably on the news site, there's like use the lead, use the first 4 or 5 sentences probably is where most of the basic information will come from.
I just don't want to be plagiarism or anything.
You're not to plagiarize because what you're going to say is the New York Times reports. Okay, so this is called attribution. If you say that before everything else you say, we know that it's all from the New York Times.
Okay.
So I'd prefer that it be in your own words, but if it's holding you up and making it hard to move forward, use their words, as long as it comes in as a minute, you know. But I think if you just, you know, take their stuff and then go through it and just simplify it a bit, that'll be fine.
Yeah, and I can't print it out at the library because the website, Microsoft OneDrive, it doesn't work anymore in the library for some reason.
Okay. Can you like work on it digitally at home or something?
I already submitted it. I just didn't print it out yet.
Ah, but I didn't see that you did this. Did you do this?
I already submitted it on the assignment page.
Yeah, but I need this so that everybody else knows what you're working on.
Yeah, you emailed me saying, oh, that's a great topic.
Oh, okay, cool. Then that it is in there, right?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. That's great. Alrighty. Cool. Moving on. Today we're talking about business ownership, entertainment and media ownership. So this kind of fits in with our topic of Thursday as well, which is why I scheduled them all together. You know, we're just trying to talk about the importance of media ownership, and because it's a business, I guess there's 2 main aspects to it. Like, number one, you know, it's interesting just to look at the economic side of the broadcast industries. And number 2, there is a whole sort of set of concerns about ownership equaling control over what gets into the media. So there are, you know, both interesting things to think about regarding those things. So let's just say, structures. Okay. So looking at the economic side, we've sort of been through the history of the media businesses, and we've watched them kind of grow from early on. So part of this is just to recap, but let's just think that as we looked at the development of the radio industry, we did see that, you know, early on, broadcasting didn't really know how it was going to sustain itself, how it would actually work as a business. So although they recognized great potential in the technology, they didn't necessarily know where this was going to go. As we saw, they went through a number of business models, and the first thing that they came up with, which was because they already had an industry, a communication industry based on point-to-point communication. So the telegraph and the telephone were obvious models for radio, which could have been, basically a point-to-point communication system before they realized that mass communication would be a potentially profitable business too. So the telegraph, where you paid to send a message and the person picking up the message actually paid in order to have it printed out and given to them. And then the telephone, which was a kind of flat fee subscription type of thing, where as long as you were in the service, you could use the telephone. So there were those two business models that were out there as point to point. And they thought, well, radio could be like a wireless telegraph. So they hadn't really thought about the mass communication potential, right? So then they realized that, well, you could also use this to send one message to many people at the same time. So they came up with the mass communication idea. You remember the whole radio music box thing with Sarnoff, and thinking of the idea, oh yeah, perhaps we could make this into an entertainment service in the home. And so then they needed to think, well, how are we going to finance that? In England, there's still a per set tax model where basically if you have a TV or a radio, you pay a tax in order to fund the BBC. So it doesn't fund all of broadcasting, but it funds the public side of broadcasting. We don't have that here in the United States. Government subsidy or ownership model. So, that would also be in many countries, again, like England, the BBC is owned by government. Government also subsidizes NPR, so public broadcasting is partially subsidized by government grants even in this country, which doesn't have a long tradition of that. And then also the toll broadcasting model, which came soon on after they realized that, okay, now we can create one message, send it to many people. What's the message going to be? It could be entertainment. It could also be infomercials, basically sold time, put out on the airwaves. Okay? So that was the toll broadcasting model, which we saw eventually developed in a couple of ways. So infomercials obviously still with us, but the majority of our funding in current electronic media comes either from sponsorship, where a company will sponsor a podcast or a public radio show or something, and primarily the spot advertising model, which, as we noticed, is predominant now. Cured a number of issues that the sponsorship model of the 1950s and 60s did in regular broadcasting, which was that, having a single sponsor develop and sometimes even produce a show led to too much control from the sponsors. It also was a little bit risky because if the show wasn't popular with audiences, the sponsor would lose all the investment in creating and producing the show, and it wouldn't even look very good on their product because they were backing a failing show. So instead, it seemed like for a lot of reasons, the spot advertising model looked better. Also, a network would rather sell, dozens of spots on a given night than just have 4, 5, 6 shows to sell on that night. So it is, in many ways, the spot just is the superior model for those reasons. Looking further afield in the broadcast business, obviously subscription is growing importance. Certainly, cable, starting with the 70s and 80s, created a big alternative to just spot advertising, which is subscribing to a cable service with tiers of channels, and now add that to the over-the-top services that like Hulu and Netflix that you might subscribe to as well. So the audience paying a fee to access the content, and of course you can double up and have spots within your subscription service, which consumers seem to be willing to put up with as well. So those are the the big models that developed in the 30s and 40s and are still with us today. So basically, how media pays for itself. Is anybody disturbed by, for instance, paying a subscription fee and then having ads show up in your subscriber paid services, or not a big deal to you? I mean, it's also kind of sweetened in the sense that you can, there's freemium now, right? Is everyone aware what freemium? It's basically like your Hulu. If you, subscribe at a particular rate, you'll get advertising. If you pay the premium, you'll get no advertising. So I guess that's one way that the spots have been integrated into subscription with a sense of choice, I guess, to still give people a sense of choice. All right. In the early history of television, especially in radio, Congress became aware that networks had a lot of control, too much power over local station programming. Audiences liked the network programming so much that they couldn't, the local stations that were affiliates were in a real, weak position against the network. So, for instance, if networks could do things like, for instance, get several affiliates in one market, it was great for the network. They would just grow their audience. It wasn't great for the affiliates, which of course would have to split their audience with another station. So that was eliminated. Another thing that was tough on local stations, which were licensed by the FCC, was the requirement for clearance, right? We looked at that concept, which is where networks could demand that a local station would have to play everything that the network sent them. Well, especially when the country was a little bit more conservative, and may turn that way as well, the ability to reject a network program was actually something that was very useful. If you lived in a more conservative part of the country, you wanted some discretion over what you had to show, because you could get, your audience could be really offended by some kinds of content. Allowed networks to reject programs to non-affiliates. Yeah. So that was another possibility, which opened up networks being able to screen other programs that were rejected through different stations as well. And a real biggie was the creation of ABC in the 1940s, where basically Congress felt that NBC was too powerful. It had too big a stake, too many stations. So they actually forced NBC to split itself up, and that's what created ABC. So that continues to be a threat for huge actors like Facebook, where we have a history of forcing really big companies to break themselves up, and so that's a concern for any company that has a real dominant position in the media business. All right, and this brings us to the concept of control, which, as I said, is the other side of this whole topic. It's very interesting to see how the media business pays for itself, but the other thing is a concern that we've always had, that of too much control over content and over other actors within broadcasting. That, I have a video here which could be interesting about about that aspect of it. And maybe we'll have a little more to say about that. Oh, anyway. Yeah, media ownership. So this presents the essentials pretty well. Let's take a look.
Hey, check it out, I just got this new phone. Well, kind of. I'm renting it for a couple of bucks a month, but really that's part of a bundle. You know, I got my cell phone, my internet, my cable, all one bill, which is pretty convenient. The phone is made by another company, of course, but they have this exclusive deal with the bundle people, and the bundle people have a deal with the streaming service people, so now I can stream movies all the time, and the streaming service I use has a deal with my favorite TV channel so I can watch all my shows. And the TV people just bought my favorite comic book franchise, so soon I'll be swimming in new superhero movies, and the comic book people will be raking in the cash. Kind of complicated, no? So many deals and bundles and acquisitions to watch for. It makes you wonder who runs all this stuff. Who owns the media? Sure, maybe you've been keeping track of who owns your favorite media franchises like Star Wars, that's Disney, or Marvel, also Disney, or Harry Potter, Warner Brothers, but also NBC. That way you can judge who's gonna do a great job with your favorite storylines or totally ruin them with the worst casting ever. Oh my God, why? The media at large, everything from newspapers you read to the apps on your phone, are part of a big web of deals and partnerships and mergers, a very tangled, kind of incestuous web. Sometimes these complex relationships work out well for the consumer, but sometimes this tangled web traps the consumer like a juicy little fly just waiting to be eaten by the big bad spider. That's why today we're talking all about media ownership. We're going to figure out how ownership impacts your everyday lives, and we're going to talk about the history of media ownership, and no, that's it for today. But that's plenty. Ready for your head to spin a bit? So, who really owns the media? If you look at things from the end of 2017, the media ownership landscape looks like this. Walt Disney Company owns ABC and the Disney Channel, of course, plus ESPN, Miramax, and Pixar, Marvel Entertainment and Publishing, Buena Vista Records, and over 270 radio stations, plus their theme parks and tons of other related companies. Comcast Corporation owns NBC Universal, that means CNBC, MSNBC too, plus channels like Telemundo, USA Network, Bravo, and more, plus Hulu and the Universal Studios theme parks. They even own the Philadelphia 76ers and the Philadelphia Flyers. News Corp owns Fox, including Fox News and FX. They also own the Wall Street Journal, the Daily News, and the New York Post, HarperCollins, and 20th Century Fox. Hearst Corporation owns 20 U.S. magazines like Cosmopolitan and Esquire, plus 31 television stations. Viacom owns MTV, VH1, Nickelodeon, Comedy Central, and BET, among its 160 cable channels, plus Paramount Pictures. CBS Corporation owns all the CBS named things, 29 TV channels, and 130 radio stations, plus 3 book publishers. And this is all just the tip of the iceberg. I guarantee that this ownership web is already obsolete as new deals have gone through. In fact, as we were shooting this episode, Comcast, Disney, and Fox had all been discussing a possible merger. But don't worry, we prepared for that. There was a big merger. There wasn't a big merger. There was something like a merger, but it was more complicated than we predicted. But all this talk of mergers and ownership begs the question, who cares? You do, or rather you will, after you hear the story of AT&T. The year is 1877, and Alexander Graham Bell and his father-in-law start the Bell Telephone Company. Over time, Bell becomes the dominant telephone provider and is the first to build a nationwide long-distance telephone network. That's when they're renamed the American Telephone and Telegraph Company. For almost 100 years, AT&T owns every part of the telephone system, from the wires and lines to the actual phones. Yes, literally. Until the mid-1980s, if you had an AT&T phone, you had to rent it from the company, kind of like you rent a modem for your internet now. In the early 1900s, AT&T established themselves as a walled garden. That meant it was a closed system that was not interoperable with other systems or companies. In fact, they refused to let rival companies work with them. They just buy them out instead. In 1915, for instance, they bought Western Electric, one of the providers of their phone equipment. Once they owned them, they made it so that only official Western Electric equipment could connect to the AT&T network. Jump ahead to 1934. President Franklin D. Roosevelt establishes the Federal Communications Commission. The FCC is meant to implement a national radio and wire service in the U.S., but the FCC also also has the authority to examine AT&T's business. The question was whether AT&T's control over every part of the phone system, or vertical integration, was in violation of the law. But the FCC approves of AT&T's business, and the company is free to dominate the market for decades, becoming bigger and bigger. Eventually, though, AT&T becomes too big, like way too big, and the antitrust lawsuits start. Antitrust laws are what exist to try and prevent monopolies, when a single company dominates an entire market or industry. Monopolies are bad in a lot of ways. A company with a monopoly can overcharge customers or underdeliver services because there's simply no competition. Preventing monopolies, or if you have to, breaking them up, protects consumers and encourages competition. And by the 1980s, more than a century after the founding of the Bell Company, those anti-monopoly efforts finally start to make a difference. In 1982, AT&T starts letting people buy their own phones, a good first step. But in 1984, the monopoly really breaks up and the company separates into 7 different smaller companies. At the time, some people thought the breakup of the AT&T monopoly was bad. It seemed so convenient to get all your phone maintenance in one place. When it did break up, though, we got cool new inventions like answering machines, three-way calling, and caller ID, all thanks to an outbreak of competition. Trust me, those things were really cool back then. Today, companies try to dominate markets through new versions of vertical integration. Think, do you have one of those bundles? You might get your TV service, internet, and cell phone service from the same company. These companies own the world's fiber optic cables where the internet flows. In fact, where the last 100 years of antitrust media has largely been about phones, these days it has way more to do with the internet. But that's where it gets a bit dicey. Let's head into the thought bubble. In a world with net neutrality, a corporate stronghold on the internet isn't too bad. You pay for internet access and you use it pretty much however you want. The net is neutrally accessible from different internet service providers, or ISPs. If your ISP stinks or is too slow, you can often pay for a different service if there are options in your area. But the ISPs believe that since they're delivering you a service, they should determine how it's delivered. They'd like to create tiered services where if you pay more, you get faster internet. Basically, they want to use their vertical integration to create more monopolies. Imagine the internet is a road and the content you want is a car. ISPs would like to create a slow lane and a fast lane, or maybe a slow, medium, and fast lane. Depending on what you want or can afford, you'd pay for that speed. If ISPs could decide to create a slow lane and a fast lane, you can see how they could abuse that power pretty quickly. We wouldn't get a fast lane and a faster lane. We'd get a so slow you want to smash your computer on the ground lane and a probably the speeds you have now but twice as expensive lane. As we know, internet access is crucial to thriving in the digital age, and hiking up prices would box some people out entirely. Or to put it more graphically, some people would be in the lifeboats and some people would be Jack and Rose floating on a door in the middle of the ocean until Jack freezes to death even though he totally could have fit on the door. Thanks, Thought Bubble, I guess. There are more consequences to net neutrality than consumer pricing. Without net neutrality, ISPs have the power to cut off or speed up certain content, like say their business partners or their sister companies. Certain cars wouldn't even be allowed in the slow lane. You'd have to pay extra. So if you have Comcast as your ISP, your Comcast, NBC, and Universal content might be faster, but other content might be slow. Comcast owns Hulu, and Netflix is a competitor of Hulu, so who knows? Maybe they'd slow down your service to Netflix. The horror! In some countries without net neutrality, ISPs have already created walled gardens like this. You pay a base fee for internet service and then pay additional fees for a social media package to access your apps, or a news package to get your news. It's not pretty. You can see why it's so important to understand how media companies are all connected. When they come together to form monopolies, they can have a huge impact on how a society communicates. We know that media companies like to band together through mergers and acquisitions. Sometimes this forms healthy competition, and sometimes, like we said, it creates a monopoly. But telecommunications and media have been regulated and studied for some time. You know what also like to band together through mergers and acquisitions, sometimes for competition and sometimes to form monopolies? Tech companies like Google, Facebook, and Amazon. These monster corporations have their hands on a ton of different projects. Alphabet is Google's parent company. Google isn't just a search engine, it's also an advertising platform. Alphabet owns YouTube and over 200 other companies. Plus they make products like Android phones and Gmail and self-driving cars. And through search and Google News, they've become a major distributor of media. Amazon, in addition to being a dominant e-commerce platform, provides the internet infrastructure for tons of top companies. It also creates its own TV and movie programming through Prime and owns the Washington Post. Similarly, Facebook owns over 50 companies like Instagram and WhatsApp. It recently partnered with news outlets to help with media distribution through its journalism project and its instant articles product. They're even dipping their toes into creating original video programming. Plus, 45% of US adults get their news from Facebook. 45%. And yet they don't call themselves a media company. What's the big deal? Well, currently, tech companies aren't regulated the same way that media companies are. Remember the FCC? They regulate media companies not only to break up monopolies, they also set rules for what kind of content is allowed on TV, radio, and phones. Different rules for different technologies. This is why some songs have radio edits and why you have to bleep out the live TV when the Thanksgiving parade hosts get too tipsy. But the FCC doesn't currently have the same authority over companies like Facebook or Google, which means there is tons and tons of debate over whether they should. Media ownership can be problematic enough. When one company dominates the means of production and creation on one product, consumers often get a lesser product. Without competition, innovation stagnates. And when companies have too much control, they can wreak havoc on our communication and culture. When tech companies that are also media companies don't act like it, they shirk the accountability that other media organizations have, the accountability that we as consumers rely on. Antitrust regulations have their drawbacks. People who prefer less government intervention don't like them. The monopoly man certainly doesn't like them, but they're often in the public's best interest to prevent exploitation and encourage creativity. To be a media literate citizen is crucial to keep an eye on how these businesses combine, split up, and interact. Their relationships with each other affect our relationships with media. Today we covered how huge corporations and their regulations impact our media environment, the macro stuff. Next time on Crash Course Media Literacy, we're going micro. We'll take a look at how government policies impact how you, the consumer, absorb and create media. Until then, I'm Jay Smooth. See you next time.
Crash Course Media Literacy is filmed in the Dr. Cheryl C. Kinney studio in Missoula, Montana.
Okay, boy, coming right at you. Our question I have for you: they showed a long list of who owns what. There we go, for instance, and so on and so forth. When have you brushed up against media monopoly, and has it bugged you at all to brush up against it, or is it just being, who cares? That's my question. So, any of these, Viacom, CBS, Comcast, Disney, so when have you been aware of a media monopoly, and when has it concerned you at all? No takers on that one? All right. How about later on in the talk, as he was discussing net neutrality, is that an issue that concerns you? And let's just stick with that one for the moment. Do you think it's important that we have a system which continues, for instance, to treat all forms of media equally as it's delivered to you? Would you be, concerned by this situation described here that exists in other countries? Where you basically have to pay additional fees to access different sorts of services.
Well, I am always concerned with an instance where a for-profit industry is in control of my access to things. Mm-hmm. Because it creates situations like this where I pay for one thing and then have to add packages on it for other uses. And I don't know, I feel like, especially the internet, should be easier to access than that.
Yeah, yeah. Because this kind of makes the internet like cable TV, basically, right? You get the basic channels, but then if you want more, you have to pay to move up to the next step, right? And yes, so that's a great point. Thank you for speaking on this issue. It is, you know, it's something to be concerned about because the door is now open for providers to ask for, you know, different fees for different kinds of access. There's also, you know, the possibility that that your ISP delivering a connection to your home can treat everything differently than your mobile provider delivering internet to you over the phone. You know, so we're already charged based on, you know, bandwidth, on how many bits we actually consume, or it can be, you know, unlimited, which is nice, or you're capped at a certain number of gigs per month, which is less nice. And consider now the possibility that you might, you know, also have to pay for add-ons to get other kinds of services. You know? So that's, I guess that's a direct-to-consumer concern. Is anybody else concerned by that at all? You know, and again, I think it is good to keep up on what the government is doing regarding net neutrality. As almost predictably, a Democratic leaning government, you know, promoted net neutrality, and as soon as the Republican president came in, he appointed Ajit Pai, who's the current head of the FCC, and it took, you know, a reverse turn, and has said, no, the marketplace can really take care of this. You know, if consumers don't like, you know, the kinds of packaging of service that the industry brings to them, they can always get their service from somewhere else. You know, so remains to be seen whether that could work or not. You know, because as the video I think made a great point early on, the complexity of interconnections between all of these businesses means that the simple ideology of let the market sort it out is, you know, it's great to tell to voters and stuff, but when you actually look at how the businesses work, there's all kinds of opportunities for, you know, structuring consumer access to any of these services in a way that takes away their freedom and, you know, kind of basically strips money from them. That's where it's, of course, where it's all based on that, of course. Yeah. So net neutrality, an interesting thing to keep up with. And again, if anybody has any news on that, on Thursday would be a wonderful time just to do a 1-minute long presentation and let us know about that, especially if you are working in the social media area, if you've been assigned to work there, or mobile access too. That's where all of this is shaking out. Last question, last thing that he brought up that I think was very interesting, with the startling assertion that 45% of adults get their news through Facebook, and yet Facebook doesn't have to play by any of the rules that the broadcast networks do, because Facebook says, or for the moment anyway, Facebook is treated as not a media company in its way. Do you think that needs to change? Do you think it's advisable that Facebook continue on without, for instance, as we saw a week or two ago, when a political advertiser on television puts a message up, they have to disclose where the message comes from. If the message on social media does not, you know, that's a very clear outcome of, you know, of Facebook or whatever social media outlet basically not having to play by the rules of broadcasters. Do you think that should stand? Should we recognize those types of services as media companies and demand more disclosure from them in terms of commercial? Max, do you think so?
Mhm.
Okay. I hope it'll go that way.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll see. I'm glad you're all sensitized to these issues, even if you don't appear interested in discussing them. Let's see. Oh, while we were looking at this interesting video, which talks too much, I also dug up video from last semester of the upcoming, well, it's the same assignment, so let's just see, what was the date? BCST 100, April 12th. So here we go. This is last semester. It is the industry news assignment, which we're doing on Thursday. And let's just get a little volume on this. Here we go. Perfect.
She has to
We'll switch, I guess. We can switch, or how do you want us to do it?
Well, once Natalia's done her little bit of news, then pass off the mic and you come and stand on the spot and you do it.
All right. So I'm Natalia, this is Katia. And on April 10th, Forbes.com reported that Telemundo introduced their brand new headquarters in Miami, Florida. Telemundo is an American Spanish language television network owned by Comcast through the NBC Universal division, NBC Universal Telemundo Enterprises. The company invested more than $250 million to build the custom-designed modern-day facility.
For the past 30 years, the Telemundo headquarters.
Please, microphone close by. We won't hear you otherwise.
For the past 30 years, the Telemundo headquarters were housed in an older building in Hialeah, Florida, without its other divisions. The new headquarters is said to be an eco-friendly building that can sustain a Category 5 hurricane and can remain in operation during weather and environmental emergencies. The building sits on 21 acres and will house 15 highly adapted studios, including 2 digital studios, virtual and augmented reality sets. Telemundo Center will also be the home of Telemundo Academy, a multimedia educational institution.
Oh, cool. So that was one news item, wasn't it? Or was that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Just pointing that out. Okay, thank you. Anyway, it was a good one, a big one, an interesting one.
Mm-hmm.
And I hope maybe they'll invite some of our students to the academy at some point. All right, up. So each student should have one news item. Don't pair up. All right, so speak up and directly into the mic, okay? Attention, please. We're doing Disney, owner of the
Hello,
world.
everybody, and welcome to Andrea's Disney News presentation. Today we'll be talking about a very recent event that happened within the Walt Disney Company. As published by FoxBusiness.com, Thomas Barabi reported on April 11th, 2018, which was yesterday, that the Walt Disney Company, which is the world's second largest media conglomerate, has launched a new ESPN streaming service as a response to the company's recent subscriber losses. ESPN has actually lost more than 13 million paid subscribers and tens of millions of dollars since 2011, as more consumers turn from cable bundles to cheaper streaming services such as Netflix. Dubbed ESPN Plus, the subscription-only direct-to-consumer service will cost $4.99 per month and launch alongside a redesigned ESPN digital app. While ESPN Plus will not air any NFL Monday Night Football games, the service will feature at least one Major League Baseball and one National Hockey League game per day.
Okay, that was a great example. What did you think about that? Do you have any questions about that? All right. As my objectives for this assignment are to have people bring in news, current news. As you saw, that was like an April news item. You'll find stuff in the last couple of years. And so by talking about what's going on in the industry, we get a better sense of the monopolistic structures where we feel, oh, Disney owns ESPN and everything else. We also hear that they're turning towards streaming. So basically, you bring current news, you connect it to the types of things that we've been talking about all semester. That's it, right? And that was a great example. Chow was concerned about having to paraphrase everything. I don't think Andrea paraphrased that much. And she also attributed, right? She said foxbusiness.com published, and so cite the source, and then you're off the hook for any concerns about plagiarism. No one expects that you could break news like this yourselves, right? So just cite the source of where it comes from, and then we know that it's coming from, a reputable journalistic source. So this is what's happening in class on Thursday. I hope everyone will be ready with a news item. And as I said, these people are in groups. They know that they're in the Disney group. How do you know what group you're in? Just click on that discussion and find out, if you're in the music streaming group or the broadcast TV group or, the over-the-top service group or what social media group, whichever one you've been sorted in, okay? So you will find that. I mean, I'm saying this because nobody's done it, basically. So you'll find that if I'm looking into, let's just find the modules here. A little weird getting in and out of that. You can find out which one it should be, okay? So do us a favor and post the link to that article that you were going to summarize so that everybody else in your group knows that they don't want to reproduce what you did. The first pair clearly didn't coordinate, and they had the same news item, basically. But it was a big news item. Telemundo creating a new headquarters with a training center and all kinds of stuff is a very big deal in terms of our news. So any questions about this? All right, awesome. Well, we still have a little more time to move along. And looking into, this is a real important slide here. And some of you may have gotten this as a question on the quiz before we actually reached it. So I don't know if you check your email, but if you did the quiz online and you got a question like this towards the end, I adjusted the grade on the last 5 online questions because they pulled from the test bank, which is for this week. My bad. I changed the dates of stuff, and I didn't change those automated banks. So basically, everyone got these questions right. And I did email you about it. So check your email from time to time if you didn't hear about that. This is, I have my triangle. This is just a little bit more detail about, the different, how to sort through the different players in the economics of the media business. So, I always talked about, networks, advertisers, and audiences. So what we have here is, just a kind of expanded model. The audience and advertisers are there, and the networks are there. So we know about their relationship in traditional broadcasting, that basically the network sells audiences to the advertisers. The advertisers, by paying, give the money to the network, and the network can produce the shows. So here we bring in the regulator, which is a very important additional player in this. As you can see just from the example of net neutrality that we brought up, the regulator has an enormous impact on all of these businesses. Content rules, for instance, regulating network television differently than cable television has an impact on what you see. If you're watching HBO, you'll see more violence, you'll see more sex than is permissible on a network television, and that is because the FCC has different rules. And as we saw, if you're watching political advertising on a network, they have to disclose the source versus, if you're watching it on a social media site, they don't have to disclose anything currently. They're voluntarily moving towards there. And that's an interesting thing in itself that we'll look at when we talk more about regulation. Networks try to do their own policing so that the FCC doesn't police for them. So that's interesting. So, and the other couple of parts are the syndicators, right? So those would be your syndicated programs, your originals that are not created by a network. And producers are built in here as well, and as they should be. They're creative. They're often working in studios that are vertically owned by the networks, but they may also be independents selling shows to different studios as well. And then all of it now running through internet video delivery services. So that's a huge, development, and I hope some people will present about Netflix or Hulu or Amazon and soon Apple, although they have yet to make a real big splash with their video production arm. And has anybody watched any video on Facebook? Like not user-generated video, but Facebook, what's the name of the service? I can't even remember right now. So Facebook is producing its own half hours and short webisodes as well. Be interesting to check that out. So whether it's originals that are produced or programming which is licensed by Netflix, those are important developments. So the thing that I'm hearing about most frequently is traditional broadcasters like CBS creating their own streaming service. Big verticals like Disney creating ESPN streaming services and their own entertainment streaming service, which will have Marvel and Pixar branded content within it. Hulu creating lots of originals. Amazon, for instance, pumping millions of dollars into, like they're going to do a new Lord of the Rings series, for instance. Broadcasters like AMC, who just announced that they're going to do an expanded Walking Dead universe, producing feature films as well as games, as well as web series for all Walking Dead themed. Okay, so very different types of companies, all turning towards streaming. And all of them will pull their content off of Netflix. Netflix in a race to produce enough original content so that when they can no longer show Rogue One or whatever, people will stick with Netflix. So I'd say in the next couple of years, that's what we're going to be seeing. Many more streaming services, Netflix having all the licensed content pulled out of it, as every network, wants to bring back Friends on their own streaming service instead of putting it up on Netflix. And we'll see how Hulu does in all of that too as well. So that's something that I see mostly. So looking forward to hearing what you guys present next class about this. It's sort of, I'll facilitate with a microphone. And we may have time to, just after each group, just sort of tie it to what we've been talking about maybe. But primarily it's your show, okay? So please prepare and try to be efficient about it. Again, you saw it's fine if you read off a script. And it's fine as long as you are attributing your source of information. It's fine to even have plenty of the words that were in the original story that you're drawing. Okay, that's absolutely okay. So that's due for next class, and attendance is mandatory. Let's just see anybody chatting in here. I think yeah. Katerina has an opinion about Facebook. Thank you. I wish we could have like an actual audio link. Katrina says, I think that Facebook should be treated as a social media outlet as it is a platform for user-created content. Users are not professionals who work in media companies, and you can't require the same level of objectivity from them. I agree on that part of the service. Well, what do you guys think about that? I think she has a point as far as, user-generated. Yes, Max?
I think that Facebook is a company that tries to be everything. And I think that online streaming is that's a major portion of the internet. And the fact that they're now kind of trying to go after that is very strange. It kind of scares me for some reason.
Yeah. Would you feel more comfortable with it if there was some regulation about that part of it?
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, okay.
Like they would have to, in order to do that, they would have to start a second branch of Facebook rather than just being like Facebook video or something like that.
Gotcha. Yeah. I wonder if that's not, potentially in the cards if they split up the service.
Yeah.
And then split it up into like a media company and then a user-generated content company. It's an interesting point. Yeah. I hadn't thought of that. That's cool. Do other people have any thoughts on this particular issue?
I mean, setting those kinds of standards could make it difficult for individuals, not necessarily people who are invested in the media industry, but just people trying to share their experience. Could complicate that with a lot of red tape that by turning a social media outlet into a media company. Like if I'm at a show and want to live stream 30 seconds of it with my friends, if Facebook was a hard media company, I couldn't do that because of so many different reasons. A lot of them being copyright infringements and the like. But so where's my outlet for that? If Facebook can't do that, then where does that market fall into?
Yeah. That's an interesting case in itself as to how they would treat infringement issues in that type of platform. I know that Twitch, for instance, Twitch became Twitch in part because in addition to the gaming that was going on, which was what they settled on, people were, for instance, just putting their phone in front of an HBO show or something and just sending it out like that, which is why they shut it down partly. So it'd be interesting. I don't know enough about it. I'd love to know more about how copyright is treated in a live streaming platform and stuff. So I'm just thinking though that here, I think where we are feeling a little bit dicey about Facebook is in, for instance, the political news type of area where, it's not so much that Facebook produces it, but rather that it has a home there on various pages that and people freely circulate it, which is, I don't think anyone would want to regulate that. But I think Facebook has already turned towards trying to make the user base more sensitive towards aspects of misleading news and stuff like that. So I think they're trying to do it. Whether a regulator coming in and saying, no, for all of this stuff you must put the source, as they do in broadcasting. I'm not sure if that would change all that much, actually. So it's interesting. Oh, Katrina's going to tell us something. What's she saying? Typing is such a slow way of interacting. But I'm so glad that you're doing it. It's cool. We have to be media literate. Absolutely. Agreed. And, the video that we watched, not this one, although that would be useful too, but, the Crash Course in Media Literacy series up on the web, or on, there we go. I recommend these. Of course, they're, somebody talking at you for a very concentrated 12, 15 minutes, but they are interesting.
Well, I'm of the opinion, just like with voting, all of that responsibility falls on the individual. I think that there are certain standards that content producers should be held to, but at the same time, like, knowing what's real and what isn't has always been the consumer's responsibility.
Yeah. I think I agree with you. Ultimately, it is. Again, it's just in this kind of mechanized situation where Facebook itself is biasing the news that gets to you. It is
through the algorithm that we have accepted as our own standard. I want the stuff that I want to listen to, as opposed to getting everything.
It's not just your personal standard. It's also, what they've found increases engagement and time spent on the site. So it's not just about you, but it's about, if people spend a lot of time sharing this particular inflammatory news item, it used to show up in your feed, which, tended to mean that you saw a lot more of that type of content.
But
old media had
been more popular.
Well, yes and no. I mean, it's a particular bias, and one could also say that bland, disempowering media was the brand of ABC, NBC, and CBS. It's just like in those days everything was okay, and they would keep a lot of stuff out of the news. So they had their biases as well. It wasn't a mechanistic algorithm, which, I just, one of the things that scares me about that is that, before it was like news editors at ABC, CBS, or NBC, they had their biases, which were based on, a whole kind of social grooming. And now the algorithm, the biases are based on, kind of machine learning as to what holds the audience attention the most, which is a different thing. It may be that much more effective, if you want. You know what I mean? So it's a new game, but the old game was, not without its bias as well. Let's put it that way. So well, interesting stuff. Anyway, let's pick it up next. Next class anyway is your turn for your presentations. Okay, so please be ready. The better you are, the better it is. Okay.
Take care.
See ya.